Okay, as that is warming up, be opening your Bibles to the book of Revelation this evening. How many books in the Bible in all? 66. And Revelation is the very last one of them. And as we ended class last week, as we begin this study, one thing we want to do right off the bat is get the name of the book right. And a lot of people say Revelations. Somebody bought me a tie that has a lot of the books of the Bible on that tie, and it has Revelations on the tie. And I still wear it. It's no big deal to me. But this is the book of Revelation. If we're going to get it correct, we might as well pronounce it right and say it right. Many would say Revelation is the hardest book in the Bible to understand. And I think that's hard to argue against that view. I think Ezekiel and Zechariah of the Old Testament might come a close second to Revelation. In fact, there are two books of the Bible that start with the letter R that are two of the hardest books in the Bible. Revelation is one. Romans is the other. Revelation and Romans can be very difficult to understand. Would you agree that Revelation is a neglected book by some? Okay. If I neglect and ignore the book of Revelation, am I going to understand the book? You can ask any school teacher. When a child comes to class, or a kid comes to class, or an adult comes to class, and is struggling with the class, the teacher says, "Did you read the book?" Am I supposed to do that? One of Tanya's students asked her the other day, "Am I supposed to be taking notes?" This is the 21st century. If you don't read something, you're not going to understand it. It'd be a miracle if you did. So, if I ignore or neglect Revelation, then I'm certainly not going to understand it. And if I do spend time in it, I still may not understand it. Some years back in a Sunday school class, I'm told this actually happened, the teacher said near the end of the class, he said, "We're wrapping up 3 John today, and we'll start Jude next Sunday. What do you want to study after that?" And it was almost unanimous. The response was, "Well, anything but the book of Revelation. We don't know anything about it, and we don't think you know anything about it either. So just go back to Matthew." And that's what they did. And that's, I think, the approach that a lot of people take. Well, a prevailing view of some is that nobody can understand Revelation, therefore let's not study Revelation. That is an extreme position to avoid. Now the other extreme is what? One extreme is, let's have nothing to do with Revelation. The other extreme is, that's all we want to talk about, is the book of Revelation. I mean, you mention Revelation to some people, their eyes bug out and they start foaming at the mouth. They are ready to talk about Revelation. They won't talk about Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, the plan of salvation, anything like that, but they're sure ready to talk about the book of Revelation. And so both extremes are extremes, and we want to avoid both of those extremes. Revelation is not the only book of the Bible. It's only one of 66. There are books of the Bible that are considered to be the milk of the Word, and there are books of the Bible that are considered to be the meat of the Word. Into which category would Revelation fall? The meat. Tough T-bone steak, right? I mean, I think we all would agree with that. One of the reasons for the difficulties is that Revelation is written in highly symbolic language. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Adam, if you will, read for us Revelation 1:3. Revelation 1:3. The point is, if I ignore Revelation, then I ignore blessings that God could otherwise give. Revelation
1:3. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near.
Okay, so the reader is blessed. I mean, we get a blessing just from reading, in other words. That's a blessing I'm not going to get if I don't read and don't meditate. And that's true not only of Revelation, but of the Bible also. Just think about the name Revelation. If you cut off the Asian and add an A, what word do you have? Revelation, cut off the Asian, reveal. Okay, you get reveal from Revelation. Just stick the A before the L. Reveal. Revelation means to reveal. It means an uncovering, an unveiling. To remove the veil from something that was hidden. So Revelation, the intent of Revelation is not to conceal. The intent is to reveal. And something we're going to emphasize repeatedly through this study is that the saints of the first century understood this letter or this book. They understood it. It was revealed and it was given to them. Revelation 1:1, we're not going to get into Revelation tonight, as you probably know. We will spend a couple of nights on introductory matters. We will spend a few weeks on the first 3 chapters. And by the time we get to chapter 4, we'll probably cover a chapter a week. So we'll probably spend the bulk of the year on Wednesday nights in Revelation, but we're not going to be 10 years, obviously, in Revelation. I don't see the point of that, but we will take some time, especially in the introduction. Sort of like building a house. If you get the foundation right, then everything you build on the foundation is going to be right. So we want to take the time to lay the foundation, proper foundation, and then we'll go from there. Revelation 1:1, if you're using the King James, I think New King James, New American Standard, maybe some of the other translations, toward the end of chapter 1, verse 1, he sent, and the next word is what? Signified. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified. If you take the I-F-I-E-D off of that word, what word do you have? Sign. Sign. Revelation is written in sign language or code language. The writer tells us. And one reason for that, and I'm getting way ahead of myself, but if Revelation is predicting the overthrow of the Roman Empire, and this book were not written in the code language, and the Roman authorities got hold of the book, telling that the Roman Empire is about to fall, what would they do to Christians then? Or anybody possessing this book? How would the United States feel if you wrote a book planning to overthrow the United States? Would they just wrap their arms around you and say, great job, good writing? You'd be put in prison. Well, back then you'd be dead. If they caught you with this book predicting the overthrow of Rome, and you're a Roman official, and you understood it, you're dead. I mean, that's plain and simple. That, I feel, is one reason why this book is written in symbolic language. They knew what the symbols meant. We don't. So through the years, the meaning behind some of these symbols has been lost, and therefore some of the difficulty. Now, we're not going to agree on everything in this study. I think it would be a miracle if we did. We're going to agree to disagree when we study Revelation. So we're going to take our time, especially at the outset, and we'll go from there. But as we always do when we introduce a Bible book, we ask a number of questions. Usually the first question we ask is, who wrote the book? Who wrote the book? Then we'll ask to whom it was written. And that may be a more vital question than who wrote the book. To whom it was written. Again, we're going to camp on that throughout this series of lessons, to whom it was written. And then from where it was written, when it was written, What are some systems of interpretation to the book of Revelation? And then why was it written? What is the purpose of the book? So going back to question number 1, who wrote the book of Revelation? John. Can we prove that? Verse 1. Signified it by his angel unto his servant John. Verse 4. John. That's fairly self-explanatory, right? John. You can look in verse 9. We have the word John, or the name John rather, chapter 22, John. Now, is this John the Baptist? No, this is not John the Baptist. This is John. We just talked about John not too long ago. How many books of the Bible did this John write? 5. They are John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Revelation. He wrote about 1/5 of the entire New Testament. Interestingly, though, there's really not a whole lot in the Bible said about John. I've done several biographical studies of Bible characters. You know, David, Moses, Joseph, some of the New Testament as well. I contemplated doing a series on John. What's the problem with that? It'd be a short series. We did a biographical series on Peter, and we covered everything John did in that series. There's really no sense talking about John a whole lot because there's not much to say about that John. Now, John the Baptist, we did a whole series on John the Baptist. There's 4 times, or rather John the Baptist's name is 4 times, is in the Bible 4 times more than this John. So we don't know a whole lot about John. We know about his parents, Zebedee and Salome. We know that as a trade, John was a fisherman. And in fact, they were evidently well-to-do fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. You normally didn't have servants if you weren't well-to-do. They had servants. And so John, along with what 2 others, were very close to Christ? John, Peter, and James. Peter, James, and John. They were with Jesus on a number of occasions where no one else was present. Transfiguration, raising of Jairus' daughter, and the Garden of Gethsemane. So, John. We don't know a lot about John. Tradition says that John was the last surviving apostle. That's tradition, and you can take that for what it's worth. But we know that John was an older man when he died. We know that. And many believe he outlived the other apostles, and in fact outlived many of his own time, because life expectancy in that day would have been obviously brief, and he was privileged to live a good long life. So John was a great man. Was he sinless? No. He was not sinless. We studied 1 John 1. John included himself in the category, if we say we have no sin, we make him a liar and his word is not in us. So John, like all of us, John was a sinner. He was a great man, but he was a sinner, and a sinner in need of a Savior. So John wrote the Gospel of John. John wrote the book of Revelation. And when you compare those 2 books, you see a number of similarities. We find that Jesus is called the Word in both John and Revelation. We find that both mention the spear wound in the side of Christ in both John and Revelation. Both describe Jesus as a lamb, John and Revelation, as the shepherd, the bridegroom, living water, bread, or manna. So a lot of similarities between the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. Of course, we know that John got all this material from the Holy Spirit. Okay? He inspired John to write these words. It says, the heading of my Bible says the revelation of St. John the Divine, but verse 1 says, whose revelation is this? Jesus Christ. The heading says the revelation of St. John the Divine. The Bible says revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him. So God is the author. John is merely the channel through whom God had this written and we have today. To me, a more important question, not that John's unimportant, but a more relevant question for us is, to whom did John write this letter? To whom did John write this letter? Adam, Revelation 1, verse 4, and then verse 11.
John, to the 7 churches which are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne.
Verse 11.
Verse 11. Saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamos, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea.
Again, John says, what you see, write in a book. And to whom is this book going? The 7 churches of Asia. Okay, we're gonna. You might as well ingrain that in your mind. We're going to refer to that countless times in this series of studies. To whom was the book of Revelation initially written? The 7 churches of Asia. Not somebody living in 2021 or 2022 now. This book was first written to the 7 churches of Asia. Meaning, they had to understand what this book says. They had to understand it. And we'll come back to that point, but that's something we want to keep in our mind. Again, I say engrave that in our minds. This book was first written to them, and they lived when? About 2,000 years ago, the first century. Whatever the book of Revelation means, those people in the first century had to understand it. It was written to them. Okay, so that's something we need to keep in mind. We want to apply the Bible, including Revelation, to any time, but we want to interpret the Bible, as we said Sunday, in the context in which it was written. We talked about Mary and Joseph Sunday morning. We talked about that engagement and marriage and so forth. We cannot interpret that in light of our customs today. We have to understand what it meant then. So this book was written to the 7 churches of Asia. They had to understand it. Okay? So keep that thought in mind throughout this study. Now, another question is, from where did John write this book? Where was he? Isle of Patmos. In fact, that's what John says in chapter 1, verse 9. I was in the isle that is called Patmos. I don't like the maps in my Bible. I like my Bible. I don't like the maps in it. God didn't put those maps in there. If He put them in there, I love those maps. But God didn't put those maps in there. And my maps just really aren't what I wish they were. They don't show everything. And my Bible does not show the island of Patmos in my Bible. But if you have a Bible that does, it's a tiny dot, a tiny island right there off the coast in the Aegean Sea. Today, the island of Patmos is a part of what nation? Starts with a G. Turkey's not far away. Greece is a part of Greece. And the island of Patmos, I mean, it's small. Population of about 3,000. That's about like Verona. Small, right? Land mass, about 17 square miles. Small. Goodness, Lee County has a land mass of, 400 square miles. And so this is a tiny, tiny island. In John's day, now today, I mean, it'd be a great place to take a vacation. Blue water, or the water's not blue, but water's not blue, right? What makes the water blue? If you dip a cup down into that blue water and hold it up, what color is that water going to be? clear. The sky makes the water blue. But it's just a reflection of the sky, so I shouldn't have said blue water. But blue sky, clear water. A beautiful tourist spot today. Even just a small population, it'd be a great place to take a vacation. But in John's day, it was an isle where prisoners were exiled. Sort of like maybe San Quentin. Yeah, not even a nice place to visit, right? Not in John's day. And John was exiled here, evidently by one of the Roman emperors. He would not recognize Patmos today if he could come back from the dead and go back to the island of Patmos. There is a monastery of St. John that was erected on this island in the year 1088. So that's been there quite a while. 1088. Been a few years, right? And that building, to my knowledge, is the same. Well, I'm sure it's been renovated, but it's been there a long time. So just some basic questions. Who wrote it, John? To whom did John write it? The 7 churches of Asia. He wrote it from the island of Patmos. Now then, let's talk for a few moments about different methods people use to try to interpret the book of Revelation. And there are, as you probably could guess, a whole slew of them, a number of them, which is why you have so many different views of Revelation. One method of interpretation is called the futurist view. Just think of the word future. This view is held by a lot of people, by the way. They say basically that most of Revelation has not yet happened. Especially from chapter 4 onward, they say that it's all in the future. As of February the 2nd, 2022, chapters 4 through 22 of Revelation have not even happened yet. They say it's in the future. Those who hold to that view would be many of your denominational friends and my denominational friends who believe in the doctrine of premillennialism. And that doctrine simply says that Jesus will come back to the earth and reign for a millennium. How long is that? 1,000 years. Premillennialism, pre means what? Before. It hasn't happened yet. Jesus hasn't come to the earth. He hasn't set up his kingdom in Jerusalem and reigned for 1,000 years. We're waiting for that to happen. We're in that time waiting for that to happen, they say. They say that Revelation chapters 4 to 22 primarily refers to a 7-year period at the end of time where things are going to be bad. That's what they say. There are a lot of problems with that view. One is Revelation 1:3. How would I use Revelation 1:3, or how would I discuss with somebody who believes that all this is future, how would I use Revelation 1:3 to try to get them to leave that position? What would I use from Revelation 1:3? Must shortly take place. 1:1, 1:3, the time is at hand. Now, if this is yet to happen, it's been 2,000 years since John wrote that. He told those Christians in the 7 churches of Asia, what I'm telling you must shortly come to pass. 2,000 years later is shortly? Now some would say, well, God what? 1,000 years is a day, and a day's 1,000 years, but this book was not written to God. This book was written to men. You had something?
Is that where the Jews get this?
The Jews?
Yeah, because they don't believe that Jesus has gotten here.
No, but they would not be premillennial though. That would be a completely different. They don't believe, they're looking for the Messiah to come, yes, but that'd be a totally different.
Where did they get that? Do you know?
Well, they reject all the New Testament. They say the Messiah never has come the first time. The predictions of the Old Testament, they say, have yet to be fulfilled. That's what. So they camp on the law and so forth. But that would be a completely different viewpoint than the premillennial view.
The majority of
And don't and please don't listen to what I say. You study for yourself Revelation. But the point is, again, if this is all yet to come, why write it to them in the first century? Who was it written to? 7 churches of Asia. If all this is to take place thousands of years later, why bother them with all this stuff? Keep in mind what they have on their plate. They are literally trying to survive each day. Persecution intense. We'll read later in Revelation about the blood of martyrs already been slain. And so you had a death mark on you if you were a Christian, so to speak. So can you imagine coming home from work one day at the pottery shop? You come home from work and your wife says, honey, I got a letter here that John wrote. And it's fascinating. It's a prediction of the things that are going to happen 2,000 years later. My response is, honey, I just barely escaped going to the Colosseum today and being fed to the lions. I just barely escaped being burned at the stake. It makes no sense whatever, if this is still yet to come, to bother those readers with all that then. They could not understand it. Revelation is not talking about the United States going to war with Russia and China and all this stuff you'll hear. What did they know about the United States in the first century? Russia, China. There was no Russia, China, or the United States. Whatever this means, they had to understand it, else why bother them with the book? Now, a lot of people will be very disappointed in this Wednesday night class because, we're not going to deal with UFOs and flying saucers and Armageddon and all that as the world understands it, and the mark of the beast and all that. We're going to talk about it. But in my opinion, all of that makes for selling of books, but in my view, does not square at all with Scripture. Notice chapter 2, verse 10. Revelation 2:10. I'll get Adam to read Revelation 2:10 and 13.
Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. You say verse 13?
Yeah.
I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells.
Again, you get a view from what those Christians were having to endure on a daily basis. Persecution, the threat of death, and the loss of loved ones. The message of Revelation was written to comfort these people and encourage these people to keep at it. Don't abandon Christianity. Hang in there. I know it's tough. Many will die. Be faithful even if it costs you your life. But again, if this is talking about things happening thousands of years later, how on earth is that going to comfort them then? What benefits is that going to help them then? They needed something they could sink their spiritual teeth into and to hang on to keep going. That's one purpose for the book of Revelation. But that's one approach people take, and again, a lot of our denominational friends take that approach, that most of Revelation has not even happened yet. Now, the opposite approach is taken by some. They say that Revelation has already taken place. All of it's already taken place. Some of them say all of it's taken place. And they say that most Revelation was fulfilled in the first century prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in what year? Or thereabouts? AD 70. And so they would date the book sometime before the destruction of Jerusalem. And there are many sound brethren who hold that view. You've heard the name Foy Wallace, Franklin Camp. They took the position that a lot of revelation took place in the first century, talking about the upcoming destruction of Jerusalem. Now, there are some who go beyond that and say that everything in Revelation has already taken place. Everything. Even chapters 21 and 22, speaking of judgment, resurrection, heaven, and hell, they say that's already happened. They say that the resurrection was the church being resurrected out of Judaism, and that we are living in heaven now. Well, I can't buy that. I can't buy that. Now, Brother Wallace and Camp did not hold to that view, the AD 70 theory that some hold to. But there are problems with that view. And some of the problems would be some of the early writings, right after the first century, historians, most of them say that the book was written after the destruction of Jerusalem. Also, there are other factors that tell us, or at least lend to the book being written after the destruction of Jerusalem. The church of Ephesus. What letter did Paul write to the church at Ephesus? Ephesians. In the Ephesian letter, Paul commended the church at Ephesus for their love and their faith. Ephesians 1:15. You're doing great. He wrote that letter about AD 61 or 62. But when the book of Revelation was written, the church at Ephesus had left their first love. Paul patted them on the back, doing a great job AD 61, 62. In only 8 years, they'd already abandoned their first love. That wouldn't seem likely to me. The church at Laodicea, in the book of Revelation we're going to read, was a very wealthy congregation, very wealthy, extremely wealthy. But in AD 60, Laodicea was destroyed by an earthquake. If Revelation is written in AD 70, AD 60, the city is leveled. In 10 years, you're not going to rebuild to that economic status. It will take longer than that. Would be an argument against dating the book that early. And the widespread persecution against Christians fits a date later, fits a later date better than an earlier date. But there's the view that says it's all not happened yet, it's in the future. There's a view that says it all happened in the first century. And then there's a view that's called the historical view. And they say that Revelation is just a blueprint of history. And they talk about the signs of the book, the rise and fall of nations, wars and conflicts, and other developments that appear in the past and even to today. They say that Revelation is predicting the development of Catholicism and the Roman Catholic Church. And what one number would they apply to the Pope from Revelation? 666. They say that's what 666 means. It refers to the Pope of Rome. Alexander Campbell. Ever heard that name? He's supposed to found the Campbellites. You're a Campbellite, you know that? Well, I'm not. We're not. But Alexander Campbell debated a Bishop Purcell. My dad has that debate book. He may have given it to Adam. I'm not sure. But the Campbell-Purcell debate, in that book, Alexander Campbell set forth the idea that 666 referred to the Pope of Rome. They say that Revelation predicts the rise of Muhammad, the European wars, the Reformation period, and eventually the restoration of the church. This view was very popular. This view of Revelation was very popular during the Reformation because during the Reformation, the great enemy was Catholicism, the Catholic Church. Many of the older commentaries take this view. You're probably familiar with Barnes' commentaries. He takes this view. Adam Clarke, Alexander Campbell. If you have the Gospel Advocate commentary set on Revelation, Hines takes this view that this is all a glance at history. This is all predicting history to come. And again, as we mentioned, some of these events, the Catholic Church and so forth. But again, if that's correct, Who was this written to? 7 churches of Asia. How is it going to help those folks in the first century being persecuted and hounded and tortured and killed by the Romans? How is it going to help them predicting the rise of the Pope hundreds of years later and the European wars hundreds of years later? How is that going to help them? It's not going to help them one bit. Another problem with that view is it traces events only in Western Europe. What about the rest of the world? Why would they focus just on Western Europe and not the rest of the world? Western Europe was only a fraction of the world at that time, or at least through history. So, again, the people who received this book had to understand it. They're not going to understand the Pope or things happening thousands of years on down the line, which would be some issues with that view. I think we're out of time. I never did hear the first bell. All right, so we'll pick up here next week, and I'll try to have some slides with some of this I meant to have tonight, but we'll pick up here next week, continuing to lay the foundation by way of introduction.